It's my distinct pleasure to introduce not one, but two colleagues from Cambridge, Michael and David, and a topic that is very close to my own heart, namely how it is that discommunication can be targeted at communities that are small, but existentially very distinct. Michael is a colleague in accounting, working very closely with Alan. His research focuses principally on the enforcement and regulation of disclosure. And he has a keen interest also in how it is that companies make their own choices about what and what not to disclose. So over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. Really looking forward to this panel. We're going to begin actually with introductions, and I would love for the panelists to introduce themselves. So let's start with Rafi, then Ioana, then David.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rafi, and Cyabra works with governments and large businesses to, I suppose, what we refer to internally as we uncover the good, bad, and the fake of the online world. So we've developed technologies and a platform to be able to monitor social media, online news sites, publicly available information, to be able to track those conversations, but also detect authentic and inauthentic profiles across social media. And then once we're able to detect that, then we look at the proliferation, the propagation, and the impact that those profiles are having on the online space, and then the communities or clusters that are centered around various topics or conversations, like I said, for governments and for companies. We're kind of a nerdy tool being used by nerds in the government space. We work with, we're an OSINT, so for those familiar with the tool, open source intelligence tool. And that's what we do. We kind of uncover the threats. So whether it's elections, vaccines, there's been huge amounts of conversation around that, emerging protests in different countries around the world, but also in the private space, in the private sector, to look at stock manipulations, other financial gain, impersonations, threats to executives, insider threats, social phishing. Those are the kind of threats that we are looking at. Just one final thing is, last year, if you cast your mind back, I believe it was about April, May time, when a certain Elon Musk was looking to acquire Twitter. Simpler times, hey? We were actually brought on board by Musk and his team because he wanted to answer the question of how many fake accounts are there on Twitter. So we conducted analysis and then continued some analysis with his team while they were looking to acquire. Once he was handed the fire hose, the data from Twitter themselves, they said 5%, he said higher. And so we conducted our analysis using our technology to identify inauthentic profiles, and we actually uncovered between 11 to 14% of any given conversation, on average, it contains fake accounts. So that's what we did, the analysis. We kind of had a front row seat. Since the acquisition, we've been like the rest of you, sitting on the sidelines with our jaws dropped on the floor, but that was a particularly interesting period for us, and my first time that I was ever subpoenaed. So that was also fun on a personal scale.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name is Ioana. If you're wondering how to pronounce my name correctly, just think of an iguana and take the G out. And so it's Ioana. It's really good to be back in Cambridge. Thank you very much, Alan, for inviting me back. I conducted most of my academic research here. Academic research referred to supply chains and injustices that occur in the mineral trade towards upstream communities in the global south, and the disinformation that occurs across the supply chains that is mostly targeted at downstream companies by the disinformation itself produced and targeted by certain self-appointed certification mechanisms that are quite detrimental to mining communities upstream. And of course, this is a consequential conversation in today's context as we look to a greener transition that also implies a significant increase in mining activities all throughout the global south. So of course, as I looked at this disinformation, I looked at very significant instances of greenwashing. So this is something that I'm happy to discuss later on within the question sections. It is not just key that we understand very well where the information arises from across supply chains, but also the way that we fund the businesses engage in such trades. So starting this fall, I will also be a senior lecturer at a banking institute, and I will be training bankers and investors to ask the right questions when it comes to this disinformation environment that we live in with regard to the businesses that they are either funding or investing in, right? Because we talk, especially in the wake of, for instance, the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, what is a moral business? How are we able to trace a supply chain? Because as bankers, and I call myself a reformed banker, as a banker, as accountants, we are used to looking at balance sheets. We're looking to uncover financial information, but we very much get stuck in that. And in today's world, that's just not enough anymore. If we want to prevent societal injustices, then we really need to look at the whole spectrum of information. Who produces it? Who benefits from the money that we're willing to allocate to lend or to invest in businesses all across supply chain, from upstream to midstream and downstream. So that's a conversation that I'm happy to discuss with you. And within this context, of course, I also looked at micro-targeting, not in the tech form, but rather in the very traditional profiteering type of business form. Thank you.
All right, hi everyone. I'm David Stillwell. I'm a professor at the business school. One of my roles here is I'm a psychometrician. So we're the guys who come up with personality tests and try to measure what makes people different from each other. And so I think the reason I'm on this panel is about 10 years ago, we came up with the idea of, well, let's not have a test, let's just use big data instead. So we did a piece of research where we used data from people's Facebook accounts, and we predicted their personality, and we find that Facebook data does predict people's personality. You may have heard about this research sort of indirectly. So a company called Cambridge Analytica read about our research. They asked to work with us. We did not work with them. However, they still read our research, collected their own data, and used that to predict the personality of something like 60 million American voters, and then did micro-targeting of those voters based on people's Facebook data.
David, there are many reasons you're on this panel, not just because you caused Cambridge Analytica. So thank you, panel. And so we've decided to run this panel as follows. I'm going to ask a question, a kickoff question to each of the panelists here about micro-targeting. And then very quickly, we're going to turn it over to you. We'd like this panel to be as interactive as possible. So start thinking about questions you might have about micro-targeting. Let's begin with David with this question. So what specifically is micro-targeting, and how, in what ways have you seen it operationalized?
Okay, so I think there's two things for micro-targeting. Number one, it's about understanding individuals from their data. So this isn't about groups, it isn't about everyone who lives in a certain area, it's about individuals. So in our case, it was predicting personality, but it could also be understanding whether they like guns or some other interest that they might have. So that's step one. And then step two is, well, once you know those individuals really well, how can you send messages to those individuals? Right? And that might be to encourage them to buy something or to click on something, or it might be to change their views. A couple of examples, other than the Cambridge Analytica one, that I saw a few years ago. So one of them was people who left the Mormon church there was a really interesting article about this. And the trouble that these people had is they left the church, but their family members were still in the church, and the church stops them from contacting each other. So what they wanted to do was to persuade their family members to leave the Mormon church, or at least to question some of the things that it was saying. So what they did was they created a micro-targeting campaign, and they sent their family members advertisements on the internet about, the truth about the Mormon church and, going against some of these the points that the church tries to push across. So this is the kind of individual personalized level. There was another one a few years ago. There was a company that sold, it was a service to convince your wife to have more sex, right? So if a man asks his wife, to have more sex, then she's resistant potentially against it, et cetera, right? At least, that's how the people who buy this service think. And so what this service offered was, give us your wife's email address. We'll send her advertisements on Facebook that says, 10 reasons why it's really important to have regular sex with your husband, this kind of stuff. So this is really, really individual level personalization that we're talking about.
Wow. Okay.
How do you follow that up?
We could just end it right there.
Explained everything there is to know, no questions, we're done. Fantastic.
Rafi, anything you'd care to add to sort of the definition of micro-targeting?
I'm so glad.
David's going to have some questions at the break, but for now, tell us about your experience, what you've seen with micro-targeting, how you've seen it used.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you. I'm going to be talking about it from the perspective of malicious actors looking to conduct influence operations. A malicious actor could be the motivation might be stock manipulation or for other financial gain. It might be state actors. It might be, in this instance, I'm putting all those examples under kind of one box of malicious actor. And so when we talk about micro-targeting, technically, let's talk about the kind of technical and then let's talk about the practical. Technically, it fits in the prepare stage, and the Disarm Foundation, and I believe there's someone here from the Disarm Foundation who are doing terrific work. John Brewer, he's raised his hand, he's at the back. The Disarm Foundation has done really good work of breaking down the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, and looking at the red and the blue, the attack and the defense. There's other great work that's been done, but they place this in the prepare, which is the plan, prepare, execute, and assess stage. And so micro-targeting is found technically within the prepare stage. If you are, let's all put on our hats and pretend that we are now looking to conduct and influence operations for malicious intent. And examples we find, exactly as was mentioned by David, is it's to be able to use that to find and then target specific people around topics. So it could be around football, it could be around Ukraine, it could be around guns, and being able to find where they live and the kind of areas. It could also be used to target people and then find them online based on their non-online interests. So if you are a legislator, if you are a journalist, if you are someone who works in the White House, you could be found and then your online persona is found and then you can be micro-targeted in that kind of way. We also see it in examples of kind of A/B testing of small messaging. If you're looking, again, remember it's in the prepare stage, if you're looking to conduct an influence operations campaign, being able to test on a small group of people your messaging, it's not just marketers or politicians, focus groups who are doing A/B testing. People say that social media is the largest focus group in the world. They're also using it. To be able to A/B test your message and see the kind of emotional response you get before you unleash it on a wider scale. On the practical level, it's useful to think of an influence operations, and this is the way it's being used by those malicious actors, to think of the pyramid of influence. At the top, you have influencers, or I should say, people with influence on a given subject. I don't mean TikTokers. I mean people who are influential on the specific topic that you want to engage in. There's not many of them, but what you're looking to essentially do is engage with a small number of them, whether it's targeted, or actually they're unintentionally involved in it. You could either pay them, you could look to kind of change their mind, or you could hack them or impersonate them, whatever it is. And then you have, in the pyramid, you have the layer underneath, which is real people, you and me. And that's the target. That's who they're trying to get to, the real people. And within that group, essentially what they are looking for are the people who are the most active, or the people who are more susceptible to be influenced, right, based on their personality, the work that David did in terms of breaking down in terms of personalities. And then underneath that is a massive group of fake accounts, bots, sock puppets, avatars, whatever they are, and they are looking to persuade, influence, amplify all the activities and based around a specific topic. The movement of influence goes up and down. The final thing I'll say, and the thing that you may not know and people don't talk about, is when it comes to influence operations, and this is where the micro-targeting comes, you only need to change 3%. If you can isolate and target 3% of the real people, then you can actively change people's opinion. And you can infect and spread an idea, and if you're able to do that amongst 3%, using the influencers who are reaching them, and using the bots who are amplifying, or maybe the sock puppets who are putting out content and amplifying, this is what we see all the time, this is what we use our tool to be able to dissect, then you can have real change. Because then the movement of influence moves up again. And you have politicians and regulators, they're not coming up with their own original ideas. They're conducting focus groups, or they're spotting a trend and say, oh, we really need to jump on that. There's this thing that's emerging. Well, why is it emerging? It's emerging because an influence operations is taking place. So 3% micro-targeting, 3% using those mechanisms of an influence operations. The final part I would say is, what I've explained is not theoretical. It's what's happening right now, every day, about elections, or about the things, the companies that we invest in, the things that we buy, and that's kind of where micro-targeting sits and how it's being used practically.
Great, thanks, Rafi. Ioana, what would you care to add to this question about sort of the working definition we have of micro-targeting and how you've seen it operationalized?
In my particular area of expertise, I've seen very specific instances where, on the one hand, we have impacts that are detrimental at a social justice level towards mining communities throughout the mineral sector at the origination point upstream, and also at a pecuniary level, of course. There are, within the mineral trade, several self-appointed bodies and self-appointed certification mechanisms that sort of target a certain messaging to downstream companies, the final buyers of minerals, whether they are tech companies, whether they are renewable energy producing companies, cars, like electric cars, for instance. So they target a very specific messaging that implies that the only trade they should conduct with certain communities of small and artisanal miners upstream throughout the global south are the ones that are included in these closed circuit certification mechanisms. And in order for them to be able to pass on that message, they employ as well a wide array of techniques and tools, not so much tech, but visits to mining sites that are problematic from journalists that then spark the outrage of the civil society. So if you are, for instance, a company like Microsoft, then you would want to be able to claim that all the minerals in your supply chain are certified, right? But it just so happens that if you are Microsoft and 70% of the world cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, you will for sure have it in your supply chain. It is virtually impossible to claim that all your minerals are sourced responsibly in a transparent way or in a traceable way. So, of course, these certification bodies stand to profit greatly They constitute a bottleneck in the supply chain. So basically, they select several mining sites throughout the Global South and certify them, which means that they close off the access to the mineral trade and to a lucrative business with downstream companies from all over the world to other mining sites and to other mining communities. We're talking about tens of millions of people, of communities living in the upstream, for which the extraction of minerals is a normal entrepreneurial trade. But because they are portrayed as being criminal, as being engaged in all sorts of activities, nefarious activities, or employing child labor, everyone stays away from them. So, of course, now there's a large body of academic research and a lot of social justice activists that are starting to raise the alarm and say a lot of these certification mechanisms are pure greenwashing and allow companies downstream to just sort of wash their hands of what happens upstream and to sort of shut the door on economic opportunities for growth for a lot of the miners, especially that now, of course, this is the elephant in the room whenever we talk about the net zero transition, is the fact that we will need to significantly increase mining with all the additional impacts, so that's something that we need to consider. But aside from that, it is very much an economic opportunity for small entrepreneurial miners to grow. Unfortunately, because of disinformation across the supply chain, there is a significant reluctance from downstream companies to engage directly with upstream communities. It's a large conversation, but it's a very important point to keep in mind that a lot of us who support energy transition might not be aware of the fact that this energy transition and this increase in mining comes with very significant question marks with regard to everything that is an ESG standard or responsible business or responsible, traceable, transparent mineral trade.
It's a very interesting setting because you can imagine a company that wishes to behave ethically in its relationships and its supply chain being targeted with this disinformation to convince them that there's actually a problem here. You need to buy the solution from me. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask the microphone runners here to stand at the ready. So let's turn it over to the audience. What questions do you have for the panel? Just go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll just ask the microphones to find the questions. Hey, you made it. Well done. Your time to shine.
Hello, David Eccles from the University of Melbourne. David, I've got a question for you. Given what happened with Cambridge Analytica, I'm just wondering, at the time when you submitted your ethics application to mine that Facebook data, whether you thought about the unintended consequences of it.
Yeah, so at the time that we did this research, there are two things it's worth knowing about. So one of them is Facebook likes were public data at the time. So lots of companies were already going around and mining, like, I know of companies that had trillions of user-like pairs, right? So, they were going to the page of Britney Spears, downloading the list of the millions of people who like Britney Spears, and building these massive data sets. And at the time, the assumption was, well, so what, right? You like camping, this is not personal information, who cares? So part of reason why we did it is to show that it turns out liking camping predicts you're more likely to vote Republican. So you're sharing some political data without realizing it. So that's one part of the context, right? So then after that, Facebook brought in privacy settings for Facebook likes because we'd shown, or at least I would say, because we've shown that actually this is sensitive data. The second piece of context was Facebook themselves were doing research on predicting people's personality from their status updates, so the text that people write. And we knew that because we'd had some conversations with their data scientists. So Facebook has a patent on predicting people's personality from their status updates, and they list various uses, including, for personalized advertising, et cetera, et cetera. So in our view, we were bringing something to the fore that, number one, companies were kind of doing anyway, kind of secretly, and number two, we helped to sort of change how that data was seen, so that now people think, well, of course my likes are really private data, but at the time they didn't. So that's my view on the kind of, I think we did good by publishing this research. Just on the other side, like all our participants, we didn't just go and mine Facebook users. All our participants came along, took a personality test. They opted into sharing their Facebook data. So we only had data from people who agreed to be involved in our research.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Yeah. Hello. Hi. Konstantinos Armaos from University of Lausanne. My question has to do with the potential benefits of micro-targeting. For instance, in regard to the climate change denial by various groups. We know that there are different identity reasons that might push someone to deny the reality of climate change. One might be for religious reasons, another one might be because they love their pickup truck. So could we actually use micro-targeting to tackle in different ways different kind of obstacles? And if yes, does it already happen? And what kind of problems might there be there?
Rafi, you want to start there?
Yeah, so absolutely. You could use some of the same mechanisms in order to be able to do the good side, and you could be able to reach those. The first thing is in terms of, I suppose there's two elements of that. There's the proactive and reactive. There's the detection of those who are out there and trying to cause bad on any given topic. So we need better detection. We need better tools to be able to monitor and see what's happening. But then also on the other side, to be able to find those people who then might be impacted by that, and then to be able to have messaging just to them, if you think of kind of that online experience. I think that's really important because all of the ways that we engage with social media is completely different based off of the things that we've shown an interest in, based off of the people that we like. And so the ability to be able to find people who might be either based off their personalities or based off of a specific topic that has been identified as being ripe for disinformation, then you can also be able to respond in a better way. I wouldn't take it as a blanket, so therefore, yeah, absolutely. I would micro-target the response and the solution to the people that are probably being micro-targeted for the negative.
Ioana or David, do you have anything to add?
Yes, in the sense that we could potentially by bringing on board the public opinion, which right now is, in my field of expertise, extremely, I guess, sensitive to everything that has to do with the impacts on climate, by really explaining to them that this energy transition and can also bring economic opportunity, and by really urging the civil society to understand these realities that happen in the global south, not through the filter of certification companies set up in the global north, therefore replicating neo-colonial patterns, but by actually listening to community leaders, to journalists, to activists from the global south who talk about these aspects. That is a type of very specific targeting, I guess. If we were to give these tools to sort of activists and communities in the global south to be able to target communities in the global north with the correct information on their realities, then yes, this could be a positive.
So I think the way that you go about doing it is absolutely key. So take politics, right? Could you ever use micro-targeting in a positive way for politics. So I imagine, have you ever read a political manifesto, right? I'm not sure that I've ever read one, certainly not cover to cover. But you could imagine a manifesto that sort of, you click the button, it gets some of your Twitter data, and it finds out what you're interested in. And then it shows you the bits from the manifesto that actually you'll be more likely to be interested in, right? So, I like cycling and education policy being, a classic Cambridge academic. So, maybe instead of telling me everything about economics or all the rest of it, they could say, well, here's the key things that our political party would do for you given your interest in these kinds of areas. But as I say, the way that you do it is key. So you have to be transparent that this is what you're doing. You have to be clear that this is what we predicted about you, and therefore this is why we're showing you this message. You have to have control, so not targeting someone that doesn't know they're being micro-targeted, right? But it's transparent that this has happened. All these things, I think, are key to the way that this micro-targeting is used, right? It's useful on Netflix that it recommends what I should watch next. But it is, it's pretty transparent, right? It's a kind of micro-targeting. It's like giving you and your data, this is what you should watch. But it is transparent, right? I know that they're doing it. I have some insight into how they're doing it. I have a bit of control over it. And these things are key. It's the way you go about it.
So we might think about this in context of maybe micro-targeting to message around climate or message around anti-conspiracy theory or something like that. But what about something like a mental health intervention or a suicide prevention? Are things like this happening that are sort of actively, positively encouraging, promoting well-being? Is this going on? Okay, well, let's hope things like this begin out of the
and just to say,
like this.
It is one challenge with finding out what's actually going on in micro-targeting, because of course it's targeting an individual. So, if someone sends a message to that one individual, none of us see this message, so we don't know what's going on, and the individual doesn't know that they're the only one seeing this message. So, it's quite a kind of a black box to actually know what's happening.
Okay, next question.
Is that me? Yeah. Hi, Margie Murphy from Bloomberg News. I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but online micro-targeting seems to be a little trickier than it used to be. A lot of the examples you mentioned with Facebook were highly publicized, and people seem to be a bit more aware. Facebook, to give them credit, have kind of clamped down a bit on this. What are the opportunities for online micro-targeting for bad actors in 2023? What kind of apps are we seeing? How are they doing this? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Great question. If we can highlight maybe in your answers some of the ways that micro-targeting might be getting more sophisticated or better.
Oh, wow. How long do you have? It's definitely becoming more sophisticated. It's definitely becoming more powerful. It's not getting less effective. You compare the 2016 election where the proportion of conversation around political issues that had a fake account, for example, bots and inauthentic profiles, were quite high, but the quality of those accounts may be quite low. Whereas actually our analysis of the midterm elections just last year was actually that there were a lot less fake accounts involved in conversations. It was much more localized based on kind of local issues, and they needed less accounts in order to have a greater impact. So it's definitely become more sophisticated in the ability to conduct those operations. Then we add to that the amount of information that we leave online. We're just leaving so much information about ourselves online that opens ourselves up to be able to then be targeted in quite a specific way. And added to that as well is, and we haven't even covered this, is the other data sources that can be acquired. In the US, for example, you don't have a choice but to have a digital footprint. Your voting records, your tax, your named in kind of, if you're an independent contractor, all of that information could then be ingested into the online space in order to be able to find you. So it's become greater, it's become more sophisticated, it's become somewhat somewhat harder to track. And also, I think the main significant development is how it may, we think of disinformation as the elections and those kinds of big events. If there's one thing, one message that I kind of try and get out there, it's that if we're just focusing on elections and vaccines and stuff, we're missing that's the 1%. We're missing the everyday of how we are being operated against. We are being targeted on any number of topics or malicious actors for whatever objective. So because there are more people using more sophisticated tools, using more data, it's a bit of a wild west. So sorry to be so negative about that.
I mean, so when we did an online study on personalized advertising, and so we've done the first step, we've predicted people's personalities. The second step is send those people a personalized message. And so this was about 2014, and we worked with a cosmetics company. So the question was, how do you personalize messages for cosmetics, given someone's personality? And it turned out it was really hard to get the marketer's head around it, right? So saying, these people are extroverted, so now write a personalized message for cosmetics that appeals to extroverted people. It took us quite a few months just to come up with a good set of messages to use. So what it means is you can only do micro-targeting on quite a small scale, and a lot of the examples we've talked about are really small scale. It's like, you identify key targets like legislators, and you get some humans to try and understand what do these people care about, what's their history, what data is out there, and then you write something for that particular legislator. Now, of course, for the last 6-7 months, this has now changed, right? Because if I feed a large language model, here's a bunch of data about David Stillwell, write a personalized message to encourage David Stillwell to change his views about the climate. It will write a personalized message for me, and if I run a loop and do it 10 million times for different people, then now 10 million people have all got a personalized message. So I think that's the sort of the near future, I suspect, is this kind of industrialization of micro-targeting to do it on a huge scale.
Great.
Yeah, I think, am I next? Yeah. Stephen Lewandowski, University of Bristol. I want to make one comment, well, two comments actually. The first one is relating to Konstantino's point about climate change and can you use micro-targeting for the good. And actually there was a paper in Nature Human Behavior by Goldberg et al. Just a few years ago where they showed that indeed you can do that. Large-scale experiment with customized messages targeting Republicans, and they were able to show that it shifted attitudes significantly. So, if you consider that to be a public good, then yes, it can be used for that. And the second point, to connect to what you just said, David, about personalized messages and that it might be able to do this. Well, actually, we're in the process of writing up 3 experiments where we use ChatGPT precisely for that purpose. And we gave ChatGPT a neutral political message and asked it to rewrite it to appeal to people who are high or low in openness. One of those personality dimensions. And lo and behold, it does that. And moreover, people find the ad more persuasive the closer it matches their personality. So I think the answer is, it isn't just a possibility, it is actually, you could make it happen right now, and we've made it happen in the lab. And so the question is, what are we going to do about it? And one of the problems with that, with the countermeasures to this, is that even Facebook doesn't necessarily know, I presume, when they're being used to micro-target people, because the advertisers are the ones who can pick and choose the likes or interests. And Facebook has no idea why an advertiser is choosing that, on what basis. So I don't see much by way of countermeasures that are technological. Do you have any comment on that, maybe?
Do you want to start?
Go ahead, David.
So yeah, it's a tough one. To your point, Facebook has their political ad library, for example. So if you want to send a political message, eventually it should appear in their ad library. And there were cases a few years ago with the last election where these adverts were targeted to strange groups, right? People who like Avatar the movie, for some reason, were being sent this political message. So for me, that's some kind of indication that there's something going on, and liking Avatar must tell you something important such that it's worth targeting a political message to those people. Actually, the even harder situation with Facebook, this gets a bit complex, but I'll make it as simple as I can. So on Facebook, you can target by someone who likes a certain thing. You can also target by group. So I could upload an email list of 500 people and get it to target those 500 people on Facebook. As long as those people are on Facebook, it will match them up. So that's even more harder, right? Why are these 500 people been put in a group? Right? At least if they like something, we can have some idea that there's something going on. But why are these 500 people in a group? Are they all extroverts? Who knows? All we know is that they're in a group together. Then it goes further than that. So you can upload a list of 500 people in a group, and then you can say, Facebook, find me similar people. And it will find you 1 million people who are similar to those 500 people in a group. And again, if you don't know who the 500 people are in a group, you don't know who the 1 million other people are that Facebook's targeted, found for you, who are similar. Right? So let's imagine you had 500 people in a group who, for whatever reason, are narcissists or something like that, right? So that could be a psychological thing. Or maybe you know that they are homosexual, right? And then Facebook goes about and finds you another 1 million people like that. And those other 1 million people have got no idea why they're being targeted. Facebook's got no idea why they're being targeted because it doesn't know why they're in the group in the first place. Its own system is a black box. And if I'm being really cynical, you would say, well, it's quite convenient for a social network to have a black box advertising system that, it can kind of say, well, the advertisers are responsible. We don't know why we're showing the adverts, so, don't blame us. There's nothing we can do. Right? And I talk about Facebook, but, these black box advertising systems are all over the place.
I would say in answer to your question, yes, we can counter it. I see that the counter-disinformation industry is kind of where the cybersecurity industry was 20 years ago, and that's, I think, what makes this summit so exciting, because we're seeing the emergence of it, the emergence of the tools, and by coming here, you've all self-selected, you're part of this emerging industry, and we're also going to have to apply lots of pressure on Alan to continue his fantastic work. But the chat, and the other reason why I mentioned cybersecurity is because I think the mindset of that industry is the presumption that there is always an attack taking place or in the planning mode. And so therefore we need to always be monitoring across social media platforms across that. This challenge is really hard. The bad news is that we're not really always monitoring. That's not the mindset that we have now. That's not the tools that we have in place. That's not the systems that are currently running. And so it's hard for us to identify it and then to be able to mitigate against it if we aren't kind of having that mindset that there is always some activities taking place. If we go on social media now, we are currently experiencing that for whatever purpose it is. Maybe it's, we heard the session earlier was talking about ad fraud. Maybe they're just trying to get our clicks and make money off of that clicks. Maybe they're trying to change our opinions. So all of those things needs to be kind of dissected, but we need the systems. I mean, I would say that, but we definitely need that. And I think the cybersecurity model is an interesting one to think about. It's an interesting framework because we need to apply ourselves in that perspective.
Okay, next question.
Hi, I'm Jasper Jackson. I'm the tech editor of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and I'm leading the project that Richard mentioned earlier about influence ops in the UK election. This is very related to the previous questions and what you've just been talking about, but when we're talking about micro-targeting aimed at very small groups, small groups of legislators, maybe people at one NGO or in one specific area, really tiny groups, and we don't have access to that black box. Do you have any practical tips at all for trying to identify when those are happening? Is there any way to get at them from the outside? Or do you just have to talk to everyone who's ever worked in that particular industry? Any practical tips would be great.
So I definitely don't want to come across as an ad, and my intention is not here to talk about Cyabra, but that's exactly what we do. We monitor a topic conversation and seeing who's engaging with that conversation, break down out of that conversation who is authentic and inauthentic, what are the clusters and communities involved in that, and the inauthentic, how are they engaging with each other, the kind of network analysis. Either they are engaging with each other or they are sharing similarities. We're working on some analysis at the moment of Chinese bots and how they're created and the common similarities that they have. So there are similarities to be able to then learn more about those communities and then to be able to see the network effect and the impact on the rest of the community, to be able to see how many people are being influenced and being impacted by those topics of conversation. So there is tools, there are other companies out there as well, there are technologies to be able to do that. This is a big problem. It's not, I'm not going to kind of say this is just the social media platforms. It involves multiple stakeholders across society to be able to do it. It's a very difficult challenge, but there are the abilities to, you don't have to have access to black boxes. This is all publicly available information. It is, though, a little bit like taking a cake and then by looking at the cake or just being able to slice it open, asking the question of, okay, how many eggs were required? What exactly are the ingredients? And that's kind of the process but there are tools and technologies to be able to do that.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Diane Binscoter. I'm really excited about this, and we know what kind of profiles, based on especially research in the counter-violent extremism arena, there's been tons of research on what are the kind of profiles of people who are most susceptible to being weaponized and being affected by psychological manipulative tactics. And we also know what kind of messaging is most effective in helping to persuade people to consider the possibility that maybe they're being lied to. And so, it appears from what you're talking about that it would be possible to find like information silos and to find the people who would benefit the most from information about this. But I am thinking that, Rafi, your clients are probably quite big corporations with deep pockets. I would imagine this kind of a project to do this sort of an effort, like using the stories of formers and infusing messaging about why people lie to you, etc., would be quite expensive and take many, hours of work. So I'm wondering about how to do this kind of a project, because I think it's a really exciting prospect.
Oh, I think that's an excellent question, right? Because this is something that's on our mind as well as we fight for social justice, and we want to give actors who currently might not have a voice or whose voices are being drowned by the large actors with deep pockets who want to sort of pursue certain agendas, right? When we talk about especially community leaders that in the mining sector, but not only, really all throughout the global south, whether they are, for instance, involved in fighting for election justice and representation in getting their messages across in a way that is, whether it's Brazil or Philippines, in getting their message across as indigenous communities in a way that is not drowned by an army of micro-targeting sort of set up by wealthy political interest and vested interest, whether it's the large mining companies, governments benefiting from it, or dictators, of course, as we have the case of Bolsonaro in Brazil. So I think this is something that we can maybe collectively consider. How do we make these tools available to those who cannot afford it? How do we use them to further social justice? I think that's an excellent question, and I think that I would urge that we all think about that.
Yep. If everyone promises not to tell anyone from my team at the company, in a week, we hope to launch a site that's available for all, where people can then check text, images, and then profiles. So I'm not supposed to talk about it. If everyone, and everyone listening on the camera, if you just keep it quiet for a week, because we work with government, it is an expensive platform, right? Even just the computing costs that involved, et cetera, et cetera. So, but we do see that. Our mission is to fight disinformation, is to shine a light on dark corners of the internet and make people more aware of that. So we are working on that. The team's working on that right now. But if we could just keep it a secret for another week, or check back in a week, then that would be great.
So, well done for next week.
Well, that's it.
And luckily there are no journalists in the room.
None whatsoever.
We're all friends. Let's keep it quiet.
Let me just add. I do think when it comes to advertising specifically, when we say advertising platforms, I think that's a terrible word to use, because it assumes that the platform is neutral, that advertisers are responsible for the advertisement, and then consumers receive it. I don't think we should allow them to get away with that language. I think if a company is being paid to put out a message, then they need to take some responsibility for that message, right? So if some bad actor wants to use some social network website for evil micro-targeting in some way, then we shouldn't just allow the social network to say, well, we're just the platform. We just bring advertisers and users together. Like, they're being paid, and we should incentivize them in some way to sort of ask these questions, right? Why are you showing this group of people this message? What's going on? What are you trying to get out of these advertisements? And if that slows things down and it takes a couple more days before your advert gets accepted on the platform because some human has to look into it, then so what, right? It's advertising. If it takes a bit longer, it shouldn't matter. And yeah, if they're platforms, when Martin Lewis says there's scam adverts all over Facebook with his face on them, and Facebook just says, oh, whenever anyone reports them, we take them down. Why do we accept that, right? If they put the advert up, they get paid for that. Like, they should stop it being up there in the first place, not just after the fact. They're getting paid to put this up, so they've got the money to assess these things beforehand, not afterwards.
So I don't know if we have time.
One last lucky question.
Hi, my name is Shannon Pearson. I'm from the Monroe Center for Technology and Democracy. The last question, I was just wondering, for companies like Meta and Google, they're piloting new products that give advertisers tools to generate ads using Gen AI tools. And as you were just talking about, perhaps human moderation is the solution. Like, what do you think are the future risks and the future rules that we should set around to kind of giving advertisers the tools to create hyper-targeted ads with AI-generated tools? And specifically what risks you're seeing? And then just one additional thing, a lot of, Apple has been securing patents on emotion recognition technology based upon biometric data. And although this is a long ways off, extended reality devices being able to take biometric data and then to use that information to target people. So I was just kind of wondering, although those are big questions, what are like the risks ahead for those scalable tools, and then also all of that more invasive biometric data about users' interests?
This is the last question, so we'll give each of you an opportunity to weigh in here. David, do you want to start?
I mean, I must admit, I've mostly got problems rather than solutions. This doesn't answer your question at all, but I would like to see academics having a right to access, databases of all the advertisements that are put out on a platform, who they're targeted at, all this kind of information. There's a bit of that with political advertising, so some interesting research has been done looking into, who political adverts being sent to. But of course, our lives can be affected by more than politics, right? If a company decides to advertise a mortgage to you or doesn't, that might have a big impact on your life. So I think there should be a presumption of making this advertising data available for research. At least perhaps we could start to get an idea of what's going on. But still huge questions with Gen AI. I don't know how to deal with those.
Okay, so transparency in some regard. Ioana?
No, honestly, it's not my direct area of expertise, but as I always evangelize, the more diverse voices we have to the table, the more diverse information about diverse communities, the more representation we achieve, the better we'll be able to use these systems.
I won't necessarily talk to the advertising question itself, but in terms of Gen AI, and we haven't even covered that in this session, I think when you look at the ABC, the actors, behaviors, and content, the content was previous, or has been mostly the sphere of fact checkers. We had someone yesterday who was talking about there are 100,000 pieces of content that need to be checked in the UK. I predict in 6 to 12 months that's going to be 1 million a day. The ability to create so much content. Now, if it's created and it's machine made, that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. The tools are fantastic. We get to use it. Great. But the ability for its misuse is huge. But then if we think about the ABC, the C is very, very challenging. So I would say 2 things. The first one is if you know anyone that works in content moderation, please buy them a coffee because they're going to be exhausted. Their job has just got so much harder. We don't look at the content moderation at all. We look at the behaviors. But also, let's also think about the ABC of if the content, thanks to Gen AI, is now kind of out of control, we also need to up our monitoring tools on that, but then we also need to be able to pay focus to the actors, because the content, if it's being used for misuse, is only as powerful as the ability for actors, accounts, fake or real, to be able to spread that. And we saw that with the Pentagon explosion tweet that was so effective. Our analysis showed that actually it wasn't bot networks that were amplifying it, it was real people who were being duped. Malicious actors have looked at that, and you better believe that they're going to be trying to recreate that. The C was the image, the fake image, but the A was the fake impersonating account of Bloomberg. And if you're able to identify both of those, then you can prevent that from happening. So that's kind of my 2 cents on Gen AI.
Excellent. Thank you all for your questions and participation, and huge thanks to David, Ioana, and Rafi.